It's early, but I thought we would start with a little bit of information. First of all, I've been told I have not worked up Eleanor's voice. It's a challenge.
My favorite one.
The beautiful part is everyone wants to emulate her in books. Have you noticed how many books are written about the Roosevelts? They never stop. I have an array of them here, and it's only a little part of my collection. Now, when Eleanor Roosevelt was born, I wasn't even born. Can you tell me what year she was born?
Me, what year? 1932.
And what year was Eleanor born?
Oh, let's see. I'm not sure what year she was born, but
1886?
Okay. I'm reading the book now on the ladies at the
Born in
White House.
1886.
Why don't you close the door? Okay. Adele. Come in, come in. Okay, come in. Hi there.
Hey, how you doing?
My husband's heard my stories so many times. My husband's heard my stories too many times.
Oh, Robinson Valcue? Come in.
I love to hear old stories.
I'm trying to get your hubby in here.
Oh, hello. Incidentally, I've just come from lunch at the Alumni House in Poughkeepsie. Who knows where that is?
New York.
Very good food. Magnificent. Magnificent. Kind of lost my French. You know, I learned French at a very, very young age. My nanny taught me French. Does anyone know where I was born?
I'm not sure if it was Tivoli or, no, because you lived with Teddy's family for a while.
Yeah, we hear that.
But,
I was born in New York City.
oh, that's right.
To a socialite mama. She didn't think I was very pretty. She called me an ugly duckling. But I outgrew it. You may notice I love to knit. During World War II, I knitted all kinds of outfits for people who didn't have a lot to wear. I also knitted when I was at the UN dealing with all those men. I had to keep my hands busy. And you'll notice there's pictures of my hands because I've always kept myself busy. Do you know why? Life gave me a few slaps in the face. And I've had a little bit of depression to deal with. So I kept busy. I want you to know I carry a handbag because I used to smoke. In the White House, the ladies would go into the red room while the gentlemen went into another room with their cigars. And some of us enjoyed cigarettes just to show them. Yes, I developed a bit of a feisty attitude. I didn't always have it. I grew up very, very shy. Today, tonight we're going to talk about some of those things that happened that create a change in people, no matter the age. We're going to share some quotes. We're going to look at a video from the National Park Service that was given to me by my mentor, and now I'm going to be Veronica.
May I say something? Eleanor always wore these dresses with all the flowers and stuff. She wasn't as stylish as you.
Well, I tell you, I took the flowers off. I know she wore beads, and she also wore a floral one that her son gave her. Yes.
She was knitting while her husband was doing any kind of a meeting. She would be knitting, always doing something her hands.
And she did. She kept very busy. And if it wasn't smoking, then it was knitting. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Veronica became involved with the National Park Service. When I was about 45, 48, my husband and I moved to Spokane, Washington with IBM. And my youngest child went off to college. So what do we call that? An empty nest syndrome. And I was perplexed. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? I mean, I was, what, 45, I mentioned? Well, it turned out I had a neighbor who was also going through some change of things in her life. And we found out that in a local women's college, there was a course called Women in Transition. And that's precisely what we were. Anyone here a Red Hatter? Anybody know what Red Hat is? Okay. Well, you know the poem, When I Get Old, I'm Going to Wear Purple? On the wall, behind the registration desk, was that poem in big print. And I liked it. I liked the humor. I liked the fact that as we get older and life gives us all these changes, there's got to be a way to enjoy it. So I began to look at things that I could do. But the very first session, we were asked, who was your role model? Any of you ever think about that? Who was your role model? I thought about it, and the first person's name that came up was Marie Curie, because I read about her.
Who was it? Sure.
Marie Curie.
Oh,
X-ray.
Scientist. No, I'm not that bright. And then I thought, Marilyn Monroe? No, not that sexy. And then I thought, Doris Day? Not really. And then I said, Eleanor Roosevelt. She was in the UN when I was in high school. And she was, in reality, a role model for what she was doing with the world. So I wrote her name down, and lo and behold, if we don't end up back in Poughkeepsie, it was our second tour there. I found myself one day taking my friend Penny with me to do a tour of Valkill. Well, Penny doesn't like history like I do, but I'm out there saying, see this pool? This is where FDR swam and got exercise because he had polio. Over here's this is where they square dance. This is the place where they run the video. There's a park ranger standing there, hat, uniform, gun. He said, you should be doing tours here. I said, are you crazy? He said, no, we need volunteers. He said, I'll introduce you to Fran, and you can talk to her about it. Can you believe I had to be interviewed to volunteer? Apparently Fran liked me because she said, okay, you can come in and do tours. And so I began to do tours, and then Fran invited me to help write the newsletter. And we would put in the newsletter notes that people wrote in the book when they came to visit Valkill. It was a beautiful experience. One of them that I really liked was learning that as you enter Valkill, it's a little dirt road, and you enter her property, you go over a wooden bridge in a car that rattles. It was called Eleanor's doorbell. She knew when someone was coming to visit. And did she have visitors at Valkill? She had the king and queen. She had, for instance, she was so down to earth. She had a woman who was from Denmark seated next to the Queen of Denmark at a dinner. That's how much she wanted human beings to relate to one another. That became her mission. It wasn't always easy for her to learn that, but let's rewind a little bit and go back to what was going on. So we learned Eleanor Roosevelt was born in New York City. You'll see in the video that her mother died when she was 8 years old. Her father died about a year later. Anybody hear anything about her father? We'll go into that a bit. She also lost a brother to death. And then she had to go to, you mentioned the town, Tivoli, up the Hudson River from Manhattan, to live with her maternal grandmother, Anna Hall. Incidentally, Eleanor's first name is Anna. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt. She lived with her grandmother for a bit of time, but her grandmother had sons that weren't too nice to Eleanor. They had to put a lock on the door just to keep her really safe. They said, I think she should learn some more social skills. So she sent her off to England, where she went to Allenswood School, and she met a woman named Madame Silvestre, who took her under her wing. She showed her how to dress, how to fix her hair. She spoke French with her. It was a beautiful experience for her. As a matter of fact, Meredith College had a play called Toddy a few years ago. That was her nickname there. And that was about her experience at Allenswood School in England. She liked it there. But grandmother said, you're in a social world. You need to come home and come out. Eleanor said, it's like meat on a platter. She wasn't too keen about the coming out party. But she had to do it because she was a debutante, and that's what they did back then. While she was at that ball, she was reintroduced to her cousin, Franklin, her fifth cousin. Once again, we see this in a musical, which was produced at Duke, and that was called Eleanor, a Musical. Now, when I phoned for the tickets, I said, a musical about Eleanor Roosevelt? They said, well, it's only from the time she meets Franklin until she asks him for a divorce. I said, oh, okay. It was beautifully done. It was done with a lot of video in the background, and beautiful white ball gowns, everyone. Time goes by. Franklin and Eleanor begin to see one another more often. And soon, Franklin says, will you marry me? If you've seen the movie, he gets down on his knee, and they're at Groton, and he says, Eleanor, will you marry me? She says, why me? You have all these other women that you like and see. He said, well, put it this way. You won't have to change the monogram on your luggage. And probably her linens. So indeed, they decide to become engaged, except he goes home and tells Mama. And what does Mama say?
No.
Nah! No. He says, yes, Mother. And if you've seen any of those movies that depict this, she sends Franklin on a cruise. Franklin comes back nonetheless and says, I'm going to be married. Well, Eleanor had a dear, dear uncle, her father's brother, Teddy Roosevelt, and he was president in 1905, and he was going to be in Manhattan for the St. Patrick's Day parade, so the wedding was timed for then. Sure enough, he escorted her down the aisle, and one would think the world was never going to stop turning. Again, they went off on a cruise, the wrong one. And when they came back, guess what they found? Anybody know? Sarah had built a house for them in Manhattan. One door in the front. You go up a few flights. There's an entrance on this side for Sarah, and one on this side for Franklin and Eleanor. Once again, not my own home. Not what she wanted, but that's what happened. They went on to have 6 children. 5 of them lived. One died as a small child, and his name was John. And
He's
so
buried in the cemetery in Hyde Park.
yeah. And then the next one was also named John. So, one daughter, Anna. Time goes by, and we're going to learn more in the video, but we also know what occurs later on. He becomes very involved in politics. They're married about 17, 18 years when they're in Canada, at their home in Canada, and he develops polio. What to do? Well, Sarah says, just go back to Hyde Park, to Springwood, and be a gentleman farmer. The little man named Louis Howe. Louis Howe was a campaign manager, because he knew that he was already involved in some form of politics. He was in the Navy, Secretary of the Navy, Governor of New York. Louis Howe, if you ever saw pictures, was an ugly little man. Smoked like a chimney. Ashes all over the place. He had some great qualities, though. He worked with FDR. He said to Eleanor, if he does that, he's a goner. He will just die. He needs to be involved with the world. And so between Louis Howe and Eleanor, they went back to Hyde Park, but they did a lot of therapy. And he learned how to walk with all of those heavy, heavy braces. His son John was generally with him.
John used to stand on the back of the train platform holding him more or less, and like I say, nobody paid much attention to the fact that he couldn't walk because he, struggled down to the car, and the open blue car that they had in the
Someone told me in another session that was the very first special car made, so that he could drive it with, didn't even need his feet to do it.
And my brother said whenever the president was coming up on the west side of the river with the train, it was always the Coast Guard going up ahead to check, to make sure there was nothing going on. And that was before, a few people were shot before that.
Yes, big difference in the world at that time. Someone else told me who lived in that area that even coming down through here, the trains stopped, everything stopped until he could put his presentations.
You realize that Mid-Hudson Bridge was built just for him, so that if he came up on the west side, he could be going up this little back road called Little Italy Road, and they would connect with the bridge up there and then go across. And that bridge was built around in the around 1929 or so, because my father helped to build it.
And it was called a vehicular bridge. And that was for that was built for him?
Yes, and also the Taconic Parkway was built for him.
Wow.
Because Bob's father was an engineer and he helped to plan that road. It's so narrow now, it's really meant for just small cars.
It's wonderful, there's no trucks. I used to drive it down to IBM when I worked out. It's wonderful.
You get through there, it's quite a squeeze.
It's amazing though how the Hudson River was developed. If you've ever had an opportunity to tour up there, there's so many mansions along the river. And of course, FDR owned property on both sides of the river, and eventually gave some to Eleanor, where the stone cottage was built. The roads may have been developed in his term, but he was also an architect. He designed the stone cottage. He also designed, in addition to being a lawyer, he also designed the post office in Poughkeepsie, that's stone. Hyde Park has a school, it's made with the natural stone. A lot of good work's done, and of course a lot of good work's done in the WPA project. So there's a lot that goes into the history making, but my focus is pretty much on Eleanor because of the work that she has done for humanity, for women, for, doesn't matter what your race is, there's a tremendous amount of esteem that we owe this woman who there's no way I can emulate her. I just admire her work, and I have fun trying to work with her voice. It's a challenge. One of my favorite quotes is her saying to Franklin, "You need to look at this and change it." And he'd say, "Eleanor, 3 things a day to work on." And Eleanor said one day when she didn't agree with him, he said to her, "I just can't do anything with my wife." With my wife. I'll just tell them I can't do anything with my wife. At this time, I want to ask if you have any questions. We're going to move along to a video, and we're going to then have more opportunity to hear more. Pardon?
I say you don't want to run out of time.
Yeah, there's another meeting coming in here at 3:30 today. I do want to share this book that I have with me. It's a lot of photographs. And this is, has anyone been to the Washington, D.C. monuments? How long ago were you there? Did you see the Roosevelt Memorial?
Oh, yes, I was there. I was there a few years. Right after it was opened.
Right after it opened? This is one that was taken in 2002. And you can see I'm standing next to her statue of saying, "Still looking up to Eleanor." It's a very tall statue.
I didn't see that they had a separate one for her, because I thought she really deserves a place for her
Can't
own.
hear you. I agree.
She really was a great woman.
It's actually set up into 4 rooms, and there's a brochure in here, and there are different eras. But I'm going to pass this around if anyone reads through it before we do the video. And we have a lot of books with us today, I thought. I have
My brother knew all of the grandchildren
he
very
did.
well, and most of Eleanor's children as well. And I've met a few of them too.
You know David?
David, Buzzy, and oh gosh.
David is Anna's son.
Yeah.
And incidentally, between the 5 children, 19 divorces. Some have been married 4 times.
Wow.
Anna was married 3 times. David took the Roosevelt name, and he's also, if you're inclined, there's a lot of YouTubes on the web. Everything from book reviews to hearing people speak like David about his grandmother. Grandmere.
What was his name before?
His mother's name was, I can't remember. I'm sorry. I dedicate this book to my children, Matthew and Chandler. I'm sorry, I don't remember, but I know it maybe it was.
I just read it.
Yeah, but he talks about how wonderful she was as a grandmother.
Yes.
Whereas her children wouldn't say that. They said that she wasn't a good parent, but when you got Sarah taking over the kids,
Yeah.
and Franklin not really supporting her by saying, Mama, don't do that. So that's, I think, the catalyst for her going on to other things. It's just,
Well, her mother-in-law didn't make it easy.
you know, and there's books out about that. And it's kind of interesting because I guess she wasn't totally a curmudgeon. But the story goes that the Vanderbilts who lived next door, and I forgot what the wealth was on that house, wasn't as big as Biltmore out here, but they said they would invite her for tea, but not for one of the fashionable dances and balls.
Well, my brother got an airfield from Daisy, his cousin, about Sarah, after Sarah was gone, of course. And he was talking to her before he retired. This was Daisy.
Her brother was a park ranger,
Yeah.
a paid one. I was a volunteer.
He was there about, I'd say, 40 or 50 years. And he was out in Grand Canyon for a while, but he came back to Hyde Park because that's where he started. And, well, he lived at Hyde Park, you know. So, but he has so many interesting stories. I wish he could be here. He's in one of these places with an assisted living, and he's up near Hyde Park right now.
Oh, okay. Well, there are pictures in that book, I believe, of Wilderstein, which is where Daisy Stuckey lived, a huge Gothic-style mansion. Again, I went there with the same friend, Penny, dragged her along.
My sister-in-law was a docent for the Daisy's house, and Bob had been in there too.
Wilderstein?
Many times.
Yeah. It was turned over to environmental group, and at the time, I met her. One Christmas I went up when they decorated, and she was, it was approximately 6 months before she died. But she was sitting in a chair next to the decorated tree. She used 2 rooms in that big old mansion, and other people, curators and so forth, lived in other parts of it. And she said to the, I don't know if he was a caretaker or what he was, but this gentleman sitting next to her, he said to her, perhaps we should bring out the songbooks and have people sing carols. And he said, yes, that's a good idea. He just stood there. So I think he just, you know, she wasn't really mentally alert at that time, but she was quite a buddy of FDR's, very good friend of FDR's. Gave him Fala, in fact, yeah.
And of course you had Missy, his secretary.
You know, there's, anybody see the movie On the Hudson?
Oh, yeah.
Did you like it?
To me, it was confusing, because if you didn't know that that was King George to begin with, it wasn't
With the hot dog?
King George,
Yeah.
They're calling him, you know, by his, I forget what his name was.
Birdie.
But anyway, it just kind of left you up in the air.
How did you like it?
I enjoyed it. I didn't really know a lot about all the facts behind it, so.
I didn't like how they ended it. They have Missy LeHand and his cousin, Daisy.
That's it.
And they have 3 people involved with Franklin
Yes.
in an affair type thing, and I'm going, he had polio!
Doesn't make a bit of difference.
So, you know how they tend to write scripts, but I didn't like like how it ended, because they had the three of them together there, and I was like, huh, that's pure fantasy, you know? And you'll hear people say that, especially this book here, this one here. If you want to go on YouTube, she does a very nice review.
Now
of
that
that
was
book.
Hazel.
Hazel Raleigh. She's on YouTube if you want to catch some of her.
You don't have one from Joseph Lash, do you?
I do at home, yeah.
That's the one that he and his wife lived with Eleanor in later life because he kind of helped her out a lot. And
She lived with her doctor.
Yeah.
In the end, she lived about a year and a half to tuberculosis. And she lived with her doctor and wife. He traveled with her. Gregory? Dr. Gregory? I can hear you. But Joseph Lash wrote books. He was another good friend. We don't have any of hers with me. There's so many wonderful books. And they keep coming.
Yeah.
They just keep coming on the Roosevelts. This is the latest one. This is Eleanor's autobiography that she has written. And you can see she enjoyed the dogs. This particular one, someone gave me when I worked at, I was working at Page Walker with the town. And this
I've been in there, but I know what it looks like.
This person lived next door, and her father worked on the property, and so she wrote that book. Kind of interesting. Does anyone have any idea how she influenced North Carolina? Anyone heard of this book? Weep no more, my lady. This was actually a radio broadcast. Eleanor would come down and visit. She would be at Duke, she'd be at Chapel Hill. And this gentleman said, she thinks we're still fighting the Civil War down here, that we're poor people. We're not. So he took umbrage on that, and he wrote this book. And it's, weep no more, my lady, we're doing fine. So it's kind of fascinating. 50 cents for this little book. Very interesting. Weep no more, my lady.
Yes.
Quite well known. I have a few trinkets with me. Has anyone heard of Arthurdale? You know where Arthurdale is?
That's what we're cutting a ribbon across the bridge.
Arthurdale is in West Virginia, and it's coal mining country. And after FDR was elected president, I was just there this year, she noticed how poor people were and that they needed housing. And so she went to West Virginia, not once, but many times. And they now have a museum there and just all kinds of goodies like a wooden map, t-shirts.
She was very sympathetic to the poor. She was always helping somebody.
Poor and also different cultures. Marion Anderson, the Tuskegee Indians. Tremendous woman. There's so much information on her. One of the things I wanted to do is if anyone wants a postcard and some quotes, we have a bunch of different things here. You're welcome to take along. This is an extra postcard of Valkill. This is one of our Christmas cards that were given to us with her toast. And I think you're going to like this one. You should have this one. This is a letter written to Hillary Clinton. This is called Hillary, dear. I was so touched when I heard you told Lucinda Franks in an interview that you found it a mystical experience to visit out-of-the-way places around the country and find guest books that I had signed. You even quoted to her my remark that women in public life have to have skin as tough as a rhinoceros. I didn't go into much in mystical experiences, but it's certainly true that you resemble me more than any of the first ladies who came between our husbands' presidents. Like me, your relationship with your husband is a partnership, and political talk is at the center. It goes on for 3 pages. I want you to have a copy, and please share it if you want. It's delightful. It's like, your taste in men is no better than mine. And of course, that occurred after she was asked for a divorce, when she found those love letters written by her personal secretary in Franklin's pocket when he was returned from the trip.
Trouble is, she wasn't alive when this was written.
She didn't get a divorce. She asked for one, and Sarah said, "We do not divorce." That's in the musical at Duke. That's the parody. She said to Franklin, "If you divorce, you won't get any more money." Because she had the purse strings. So Ellen said, "Okay, we'll stay together, but we'll really be different."
Yeah.
So Eleanor had a lot of friendships by then. She was very involved politically, all kinds of groups. She did write a letter to the Daughters of America. She was on it. I have a copy of that in that book going around, because they didn't want Marian Anderson to sing, so she set that up. She was outspoken, but in a way that was somehow wiggled in, you know, kind of a kindness, softer. She had a goal, and she figured out along the way, you can't sit back and be fearful in life. You need to make changes. Hence all these quotes that I have. A woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she gets into hot water. Eleanor Roosevelt. She had a good friend in Amelia Earhart. And again, publishers went about setting out a book about Amelia Earhart and Eleanor Roosevelt going up in the skies over Washington, D.C. to fly an airplane. You can see they're at a dinner party and they just go and get into an airplane in their beads and all. It's delightful, absolutely delightful. And then we find out that Amelia didn't really fly the plane. The Secret Service did. But it's a delightful book. Delightful, Amelia and Eleanor. So she had friends in many places of all descriptions. Of all. She was a friend with singer Harry, I can't remember his name, Harry. In addition to that, people have discovered that, you know, it's really good. Let's write a cantata. This is based on her life and works. This friend of mine in high school, his wife Sally, and Libby Larson wrote this choral score, and she gave it to me, and she said, "It's really depressing." I said, her life kind of had some of those elements. So a friend of mine was playing it over here in the piano. If you're musically gifted, you can bat out a few notes. And finally, I want to make one comment on one of the newer books coming out. And this is the latest one. It's one of 3 that I have seen about Marina Hickok. Her journalist friend that lived in the White House with her. She was good confidant. She was a great friend. Some say they had a romantic relationship. Her son says she did in his biography.
Yes.
Lorena Hickok. Lorena Hickok is the one that recommended she write those My Day journal columns. She lived in the White House. Eleanor wanted to just promote women in journalism, and she had quite a high-level job, so it worked out well. The only problem was she became very possessive, so Eleanor said, "You gotta move." So she moved out of the White House. But I understand from what I'm reading that she was quite bitter about that because she really loved Eleanor. But there are a lot of books now about their relationship, and you'll see a lot of that again on YouTube. Are there any questions right now? I don't want to go on and on. Any questions?
I'm kind of surprised that I don't know more about her life because I grew up in the 60s and 70s. It was like she was erased. I mean, I didn't learn much, and I grew up in New York State.
Oh, okay. Well, she died in 62.
Yeah, I was very surprised that she wasn't more celebrated and talked about.
Oh, in that
class
time
and-
frame.
Yes, and that's
That's interesting,
because
yeah.
I'm kind of shocked. I don't know much at all about this.
Yeah.
I love history.
It's more, as I said, she was in the news more than 50s with Gary Truman. She was a great LA Eugene. She was really changed her shirt and of course she supported the candidate. I came to see her, you see that?
I know. I'm just kind of wondering if there was some sort of male relationship.
Well, it's interesting what happened with her property. After she died, it went to her family, her kids, and her son sold it, sold Valkill. And Valkill was split up into apartments. It's such a small world. I was working in IBM in Yorktown, and we had blood donor day, and the nurse that was doing the, the blood and all, we were chatting away, and she said she lived in Hyde Park. I said, "Oh, where'd you live?" And she said, "I live in this apartment complex where Eleanor Roosevelt used to live." I said, "Yeah, in Dodge." She said, "Truly?" I said, "Did you live in an apartment where there was a hole in the floor?" She said, "I did." I said, "That was Eleanor Roosevelt's bedroom." It was a storage area on the floor. There's a picture in my book. And I was like, the world is just too small here, But that was in the 90s, 89. And by then, it was still. So what happened was they sold the property. And then a group, this is how I got involved. It was about 1987, I'm going to say. A friend of mine was at Vassar. Called me up one day and she said, "Veronica, how would you like to go to a potluck at Eleanor Roosevelt's Stone Cottage?" Now, she knew I liked Eleanor and I liked history. I said, "Tell me when." So off we went to the potluck, and it was in the Stone Cottage, which was the very first house that FDR built for Eleanor for her retreat. So friends of Vassar were the ones that were instrumental in getting the property back. And then eventually it took an act of Congress to name it, and that was signed by Kennedy, I believe, to name it a historical site for the First Lady. It's the only one that was in there. And they took it back and it became an education center in the Stone Cottage. And then you'll see in the video how they started the furniture factory and how it really didn't fly because the furniture was very expensive, but it was, again, with her friends, that you'll see in the video. And that's where she eventually moved to after FDR died. And it was called My Own Home, her first home.
What was it?
My Own Home, she called it. Yeah. So with that, let's do the video. Are we ready to go, Robert?
Yeah.
I'll get the lights.
It's been passed around.
No, I haven't.
of security unless you can live bravely, excitingly, imaginatively. Life was meant to be lived and curiosity to be kept alive. One must never, for whatever reason, turn his back on life.
Eleanor Roosevelt's life was full of passion and purpose. Journalist, diplomat, and activist, she revolutionized the role of First Lady and became a force in the Democratic Party.
We cannot tell from day to day what may come. This is no ordinary time. No time for weighing anything except what we can best do for the country as a whole.
When Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt entered the White House in 1933, millions of Americans were unemployed. Hundreds of thousands roamed the country in search of food, shelter, and work.
I believe you should tell the story of injustices, of inequalities, of bad conditions, so that the people as a whole in this country really face the problems.
Eleanor Roosevelt was determined to make a difference in the lives of Americans. She had no interest in staying at home in the White House.
My husband knew very well that if I just did the social entertaining, it would be almost unbearable. And so he let me do the things that allowed me to see what was going on in the different programs.
In 1 year alone, she traveled 40,000 miles. It was headline news when she stayed in the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt went everywhere, visiting working people across the country. On one famous occasion, she insisted on going down inside a coal mine. Soon afterwards, a cartoon appeared depicting two miners looking up in surprise at the sudden arrival of Mrs. Roosevelt.
I was doing things that had not been done before. It was indicated to me that I should feel somewhat ashamed of that cartoon, and there certainly was something the matter with a woman who wanted to see so much and to know so much.
From 1936 until a few months before her death in 1962, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote her daily column, My Day. She published more than 7,000 of them in nearly 200 newspapers, reaching millions of American households.
The caption reads, "But it would make such a nice scoop if you would only tell me, Franklin." It was very amusing because Franklin never told me anything.
Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt both came from prominent New York families. As a young woman, she was very different from the other debutantes Franklin knew. Shy and serious, she volunteered to teach in a settlement house on the Lower East Side.
I was being educated, and I saw little children who worked hours on end until they fell off the benches. This was all completely new to me. My first introduction to conditions of labor.
Eleanor's compassion for others stemmed from her own childhood, which she described as a series of losses. Her mother died of diphtheria when Eleanor was 8. Her beloved father died a year later. She was raised by her strict and distant grandmother until she was sent off to the Allenswood School in England. There, she discovered her own intellectual curiosity and a new confidence in herself. Dear Mama, I am the happiest man in the world, Franklin wrote to his mother. As different as they were, Eleanor and Franklin found in each other kindred spirits. Their whirlwind courtship and marriage surprised their friends and family, especially his mother, the formidable Sarah Delano Roosevelt. For the next 15 years, as they raised their 5 children, they lived in houses belonging to Sarah. was a dutiful wife and daughter-in-law until she discovered her husband's infidelity. While she agreed to stay in the marriage, she began to assert her own independence. She developed close friendships with women who were active in politics. In 1924, FDR suggested that they build a cottage a few miles from Sarah's house. They named it Valkill, after a little stream where they loved to picnic. Valkill became a retreat, a place that Eleanor could call her own. Over the years, family and friends would come here to swim, relax, discuss politics, and laugh. In 1926, Eleanor and her friends built a factory next to the cottage. They invited local farmers to learn furniture making and other skills that would help them survive economically. They named the experiment Valkill Industries. During the Depression, many of FDR's New Deal programs had similar goals. One of these was Arthurdale, a model community in West Virginia built with Eleanor's support.
Franklin and I had a desire to see improvements for people. I knew about social conditions, perhaps more than he did, but he knew about government and how you could use government to improve certain things. And I think we began to get an understanding of teamwork.
In her role as First Lady, many have said she became his conscience.
I have access to the President. And if I don't use that access to do things that need to be done in this country, I would be sorely remiss and irresponsible. I'm the agitator. He's the politician.
Eleanor Roosevelt spoke out publicly about important issues. Her views on segregation alienated many Americans, especially in the South.
I remember very well on the anti-lynching bill. He said he could not make that bill a must because he had to have the Southern vote in case he had to meet a war. I said I feel very strongly that the anti-lynching bill should pass. He said, I didn't say that you had to take any special stand. You do what you think is right. On another occasion, he said, I can always say I can't do anything with my wife.
Eleanor and Franklin's political partnership spanned 35 years, 12 of them in the White House. She was by Franklin's side as he led the country out of the Depression and into the Second World War. All 4 of their sons enlisted and risked their lives overseas. In April 1945, just a few weeks before Germany surrendered and the war in Europe ended, Franklin Roosevelt died. Their marriage had endured many trials, including his long battle with polio. Now, their partnership had come to an end. Eleanor told reporters, the story is over. 8 months later, President Truman asked her to represent America at the first meeting of the United Nations, helping to fulfill her husband's dream. In Europe, she saw the destruction of the war, the bombed-out cities, the ruined lives of displaced people.
My visit was so packed full of emotions, it is hard to give you an adequate idea of what I saw or felt. When will our consciences grow so tender that we will act to prevent human misery rather than avenge it?
Eleanor Roosevelt had great hopes that the United Nations would be an instrument for world peace.
I knew that as the only woman, I'd better be better than anybody else. I really had better do all my homework. So I read every paper, and they were very dull sometimes, but I did read them all.
At the end of the first session, she was unanimously chosen to chair a committee to draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It took 2 years to persuade the contentious group of delegates to agree on the document.
Man's desire for peace lies behind this declaration. The realization that the flagrant violation of human rights by Nazi...
At 3 o'clock in the morning on December 10, 1948, the General Assembly overwhelmingly approved the Declaration. She considered it the most important achievement of her life.
Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world.
At Valkill, she put her beliefs into practice.
I had the first of the picnics for the Wiltwick School for Boys the other day, and I have never realized so keenly before how perfectly free from self-consciousness children can be, if nobody reminds them that there are any differences in color or race.
In 1957, the eyes of the world turned to Little Rock, Arkansas. Federal troops were called in to protect black students whose lives were threatened as they tried to integrate the high school.
This was the kind of thing the Nazis had done to the Jews of Germany, and there also as a misguided effort to demonstrate their race superiority.
What can we do about this? It's a big question. Face it and realize that we can't afford to have two kinds of citizens. We must have equal citizenship for anybody in our country.
Eleanor Roosevelt was willing to risk her life for her convictions. In 1958, the Ku Klux Klan placed a $25,000 bounty on her head. She was scheduled to lead a workshop on civil disobedience in the mountains of Tennessee. The FBI warned that they could not protect her. Undaunted, she drove through dark, winding mountain roads, past burning crosses and armed Klansmen.
Courage is more exhilarating than fear, and in the long run it is easier. We do not have to become heroes overnight, just a step at a time.
Throughout the 1950s, Eleanor Roosevelt was an international ambassador for peace. While she traveled around the world, Valkill remained her refuge. She had transformed the factory building into a comfortable cottage, the only home she ever owned.
There is something about the serenity and beauty of a countryside in winter. The murmur of the brook under the ice, the new and untouched snowfall. All of those things are joys which only the country can provide.
When she was at home in Valkill, the world came to her. She was the most powerful woman in America. In 1960, Senator John F. Kennedy came to Valkill hoping to win her endorsement for the presidency. During a tense meeting, she finally agreed, on the condition that he take a stronger stand on civil rights. In the last year of her life, she traveled to Israel for the 4th time in her efforts to bring peace to the Middle East.
One thing I believe profoundly: we make our own history. Surely, in the light of history, it is more intelligent to hope rather than to fear, to try rather than not to try. For one thing we know beyond all doubt: nothing has ever been achieved by the person who says, "It can't be done."
show when she died at 62, the funeral. I have a picture of my brother standing behind all the presidents there, and I was hoping that they would finish it up when she died. So,
No, they kind of just left her living, and you know, it's kind of there's a lot on the movies, and certainly a lot on YouTube. But this is beautiful. They captured Valkill beautifully.
I've been up there.
Yeah. Anybody else been to Valkill? Hyde Park? It's an adventure. I used to love to go there. Any other questions? Any questions? How did you like her smile at the end of the?
She was very pretty when she was younger.
She was a terrible driver, they tell us.
Yeah.
She had a car accident, and so she had to have her teeth done. But it made quite a difference in her facial expressions.
She was a busy cat, I'll tell you.
She was extremely busy, and her daughter used to say, "Mother, will you just stay home, slow down?" Even FDR said to her, after his secretary died, the one, I have trouble with names anymore, after she died, he was kind of lonely. And in one of the movies, you'll see where he asks her if she'll stay home more, and she says, "I'll think about it." The next morning, and she comes downstairs and says, "If you don't mind, I'm going to go see the troops. I'm going to go visit the troops." So it was kind of like, she didn't say it, you know, but you got the gist of, I've spent a lot of lonely years. And
she even went to see Joseph Lash when he was in the service too, you know, amongst her own children. That was her biographer.
Yes, he's written several. There's so many by her, and so many by the biographer. Her name, she's written about a lot of the presidents. And she's very, very generous. Most of them are very, very little negativity.
You remember her Our Day columns in the Poughkeepsie paper?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have copies of them, the books. They're all in print now. Well, no, 60s? No, I don't remember them too much, but she wrote right up until like 61, I believe. Yeah, 60, 61. You had mentioned there wasn't much news about her in the 60s. Like so often, you know, you become a hero after you're dead, you know? This is the second video of National Parks she's done. The first one, they didn't say anything at all about the separation. So now we'll do a little bit more with that. Well, if there are no more questions, then this will conclude it because you have another speaker coming in. So. I don't know her voice real well. It's really a challenge because it's in the throat. But I did say that I would offer it. Anyone want a copy of the human rights document?
I can't see it.
You're welcome to it.
I have to tell you. I have to call my brother and tell him about it.
Oh, okay.
He's up in
I haven't been back there in a while. I have seen
this back in high school.
Pardon?
Back in
My kids.
I was teaching in Norfolk for a while. I worked teaching had to take it over.
What years?
Oh, is that where it went?
Oh, okay. My youngest graduated in '84. And my son played in the Yeah. I used to volunteer